The first time the word family curdled in my mouth, tasting not of warmth and safety but of a bitter, metallic obligation, was the day my daughter was born. It was not a gradual realization, but a seismic shift that occurred in the sterile, fluorescent-lit silence of a hospital waiting room. I, Sarah, had spent 32 years building my life on the bedrock of a single, unchallenged principle: we show up for family. It was the gospel according to the Millers, preached by my father, Robert, and dutifully echoed by my mother, Carol. It was a mantra that justified 1,000 small surrenders, a lifetime of bending my own needs to the whims of those who shared my blood. My brother, Kyle, was the primary beneficiary of this doctrine. 2 years my junior, he wore his irresponsibility like a charming, slightly rumpled jacket. There was always a crisis: a car payment missed, a landlord placated, a job lost under mysterious circumstances. And I, the stable one, the one with a good job in marketing and a tidy 2-bedroom apartment in a decent part of Chicago, was the designated first responder. I transferred funds, I made phone calls, I smoothed things over. Each time, my father would clap me on the shoulder and say, "That's my girl. Family takes care of its own." The words were meant as praise, but they felt like a chain, locking me into a role I had never chosen. I had imagined my daughter's birth would be different. In the soft-focused daydreams of my pregnancy, I saw myself surrounded by that very family, their faces alight with shared joy. My mother would be holding my hand, my father beaming with a grandfather's pride, and Kyle, for once, would be present not as a problem, but as a proud uncle, maybe even cracking one of his dumb jokes to break the tension. It was a tableau of unity, a moment where the sacrifices would finally feel worth it, crystallized into a perfect, loving memory. Life, however, has a cruel habit of refusing to follow our scripts. My daughter, Chloe, decided to make her entrance into the world not on her due date, but a harrowing 10 weeks early. One moment, I was finalizing the color scheme for her nursery, a soft seafoam green, and the next, I was engulfed in a vortex of panic, my body betraying me in a rush of pain and fear. The calm delivery room I had envisioned was replaced by a chaotic blur of shouting voices: "Stats are dropping. We need an OR, now," and the frantic beeping of monitors. There was no gentle placement of a swaddled bundle on my chest. No triumphant cry. Just the stark, terrifying silence as they whisked her away, a tiny, purplish form lost in a tangle of wires and medical equipment, before I could even see her face. The silence that followed was deafening. They wheeled me, numb and shaking in a hospital gown with N4 still taped to my arm, to the neonatal intensive care unit. The corridor seemed endless, the linoleum floor gleaming coldly under the harsh overhead lights. And then I saw her. My Chloe. She was impossibly small, her skin so translucent I could trace the delicate map of her veins. She was encased in a plastic incubator, a tiny astronaut in a hostile environment, with wires and tubes snaking across her body, connecting her to a symphony of beeping, whirring machines that were keeping her alive. The sight of her, so fragile and fighting, was a physical blow to my chest. I sank into the hard, plastic chair beside her isolette, my hands trembling. The instinct to reach for family, that deeply ingrained programming, kicked in. My fingers, clumsy with shock, found my phone. I opened the group chat, Miller family, with my parents, Kyle, and my sister, Amanda. The words I typed were simple, a bare-bones plea from the edge of a cliff: "We need prayers, please. Chloe's in the NICU. It's serious." I sent the message into the digital void and waited. 1 minute. 5. 10. The silence from my phone was a stark contrast to the relentless, anxious rhythm of the monitors. I concocted excuses for them: maybe Dad was in a meeting, Mom was grocery shopping, Kyle was driving. But then, a notification. A bubble popped up in the chat. It wasn't a prayer, an emoji, or a "we're on our way." It was a photo from Kyle. A sun-drenched beach, his shirtless torso gleaming, a garish cocktail in his hand, and that familiar, carefree grin plastered across his face. The caption read, "Living the dream. #family first #blessed." I stared at the image, the vibrant colors of violent assault on the sterile, monochrome world of the NICU. The #family first, felt like a punch to the gut. In that moment, the foundation of my entire life, the gospel I had lived by, shattered into a million pieces. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply turned off my phone's notifications, the screen going dark, and turned my entire being back to my daughter, to the only thing in that room that was real, and fighting, and truly mine. The silence from my family was no longer an absence, it was an answer. And I was only just beginning to understand the question. The silence from my family stretched from hours into days, a vast, empty plain where the only sounds were the mechanical hymns of the NICU. I existed in a liminal space, a bubble of fear and vigilance defined by the four walls of the unit. Sleep was a series of fitful, 20-minute surrenders in the unforgiving plastic chair, my neck stiffening into a permanent ache. I learned the language of this new world, the steady, reassuring beep of a stable heart rate, the terrifying, high-pitched whine that signaled a dip in oxygen saturation, the gentle whoosh of the ventilator that was breathing for my daughter. The nurses, Angela, Maria, and David, became my anchors, their calm professionalism a lifeline. They brought me graham crackers and apple juice, and explained the hieroglyphics on the monitors, the numbers that meant holding her own and the ones that made their eyes flicker with brief, professional concern. 2 days after my unanswered plea, an unexpected figure appeared at the entrance to the NICU, hesitating as he scrubbed his hands at the sanitizing station. It was Ben, my ex-husband. The man I hadn't seen in over a year, the one who had traded our life for a new one with a woman named Jessica and their infant son. I felt a surge of defensive anger. What right did he have to be here? He didn't approach with false sympathy. He simply walked over, placed a large takeout coffee in my hands, the first warm, substantial thing I'd held in days, and set down a small, folded blanket on the tray next to me. It was soft, a pale yellow, and utterly devoid of wires. Jessica packed it, he said quietly, his voice a low rumble that didn't disturb the unit's hush. She thought. I don't know what she thought. But she knew I needed to come. I stared at him, the coffee warming my frozen fingers. Why? He met my gaze, his own tired. Because she's a mom. And I heard. That was all. He didn't offer empty platitudes or ask for updates. He just pulled up another plastic chair and sat beside me. He didn't try to hold my hand or put an arm around me. He was just present. A solid, silent bulwark against the crushing isolation. That was the first time the dam broke. The tears came then, silent and hot, streaming down my face as I stared at Chloe, my shoulders shaking. Ben didn't say a word, he just passed me a tissue from the box on the stand. My grandmother, Eleanor, started appearing every other evening. At 72, she still worked the closing shift at a local grocery store, and she came directly from work, her uniform smelling faintly of detergent and fresh bread. She didn't have much, but she brought what she could, a thermos of homemade chicken soup, a still-warm muffin wrapped in a napkin, a new, tiny knitted hat for Chloe. She would sit with me, her gnarled hand resting on my knee, and just watch her great-granddaughter breathe. She's a fighter, our girl, she'd say, her voice firm. Comes from strong stock. Her presence was a quiet rebuke to the absence of the rest of them. The rest of my family remained a ghost story. No calls. No texts. My mother didn't suddenly appear with a mother's intuition. My father didn't call to use his booming voice to demand answers from the doctors. My sister, Amanda, whom I'd bailed out of a predatory payday loan just 6 months prior, was a black hole on my phone screen. The contrast was a chasm, and I was falling into it. 2 weeks blurred into this new, brutal routine. I was a ghost in my own life, my world shrunk to the rhythm of alarms and the slow, agonizing climb of Chloe's weight on the daily charts. Then, one night at 3:20 a.m., my phone, which had been a silent, dead weight in my pocket, erupted. The vibration was so violent it skittered across the clinical tray. I ignored it, too exhausted to care about the world outside this room. But it persisted. One call, then another. When I finally glanced at the screen, my blood ran cold. 80 missed calls. 1 new text message. The preview read, "Answer now. We need help." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the moment of reckoning. Had something happened to Mom? To Grandma Eleanor? Had they finally finally understood the gravity of the situation and were mustering the cavalry? A pathetic, desperate hope bloomed in my chest. With trembling fingers, I hit call back. He answered on the first ring. Sarah. His voice was sharp, strained, but not with concern for me. Dad? What's wrong? Is it Mom? Your brother, he cut in, his words rapid and impatient. He's in a bind. Lost his wallet in Miami. All his cards are frozen. He's stranded, Sarah. He needs money, now. I blinked, the fluorescent light suddenly feeling unbearably bright. The beach. The same Miami beach from the photo. The emergency wasn't a hospital bed. It was a lost wallet. What? Was all I could manage. He's in real trouble, Dad barreled on, his tone becoming a demand. He missed some payments, there's interest piling up. He needs $1,000, or he's screwed. I waited. I let the silence on my end stretch, waiting for the question that had to come. How is she? How is Chloe? Are you okay? It never came. Dad, I said, my voice unnervingly calm. Did you see my message? The one I sent 2 weeks ago. He paused, a beat of irritated silence. Yeah, we saw it. But we figured you had it handled. You're strong, Sarah. You always land on your feet. Besides, he added, and I could almost hear his dismissive shrug, prayers don't change the readings on a machine, right? The world narrowed to a pinprick. The beeping of the monitors, the hiss of the oxygen, the sight of my daughter's tiny chest rising and falling, it all fused into a white-hot point of clarity. He was telling me that his son's vacation inconvenience was a greater emergency than his granddaughter's fight for life. I can't help you, I said, the words clear and final. What do you mean, you can't? His voice rose, laced with anger. Don't be dramatic, Sarah. You're the one with the good job. You can handle this. It's just money. And then came the line that severed the last fraying thread. He's just a baby, Sarah. She won't even remember any of this. I hung up. The action was simple, mechanical. Then, methodically, I opened my contacts. I blocked my father's number. Then my mother's. My sister's. My brother's. I opened the Miller family chat, stared at the last message, Kyle's grinning, shirtless photo, and tapped leave chat. There was no fanfare, no final, dramatic speech. Just a quiet, digital severance. I turned back to Chloe, slipping my hand through the porthole of the incubator. Her tiny, perfect fingers wrapped reflexively around my index finger. They're wrong, I whispered to her, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. You are worth every second of this. And I will never let anyone make you feel like you're not. The fallout was swift. A few days later, my sister Amanda showed up at my apartment door, unannounced. I opened it, holding a sleeping Chloe, my body a shield. Sarah. Hey, she said, offering a weak smile. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check in. The lie hung in the air between us. Then, without missing a beat, she continued, listen, my rent's short this month. Just a couple hundred. Can you spot me? Just until payday. I looked at her, this stranger who shared my DNA, and felt nothing. No, I said. She blinked, confused. What? Come on, Sarah. Don't be like that. I'm struggling here. I asked for one thing, I said, my voice low and even. One thing. And you couldn't even be bothered to send a heart emoji while my daughter was on a ventilator. Her face hardened. I didn't think it was that serious. You always manage, Sarah. You don't need anything from anyone. And there it was. The core of their belief system. My strength was not a quality to be admired, but a convenience to be exploited. I closed the door in her face. The final, brutal escalation came a week after Chloe and I were finally, miraculously, discharged. We were home, navigating the beautiful, exhausting chaos of newborn life, when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and my stomach dropped. My parents and Kyle stood there, dressed in their Sunday best, faces arranged in a pantomime of contrition. They held a casserole dish and a manila envelope. Reluctantly, I opened the door, not inviting them in. "Sarah," my mother began, her voice dripping with a sweetness I knew was poisonous. "We've missed you. We're family. It's time to heal." She thrust the casserole at me. Then my father presented the envelope. "We know there's been tension about money, so we made this." He pulled out a spreadsheet. A detailed, itemized log of every cent I'd ever given them over the past decade. "See? We kept track. We always intended to pay you back. We never took you for granted." I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. The audacity was breathtaking. Kyle then stepped forward, holding out a crumpled envelope. "Here. $60. A first payment." He said it as if he were bestowing a kingdom upon me. "Why now?" I asked, my voice cold. My father's mask finally slipped. "We're worried about you, Sarah. You're isolating yourself. Cutting us out after your grandmother filled your head with nonsense? It's not healthy." "If you're going to cut us off," he snarled, his eyes glinting with malice, "then don't expect us to keep pretending everything is fine. You'll have to make some changes, too." I didn't understand the threat until that evening. An email arrived from my landlord, Mr. Abernathy. He wanted to discuss my lease. My father, the co-signer from my post-college days, had called him. He'd expressed concern about my unpredictable behavior and volatile family situation and formally withdrew his co-signature, hoping to destabilize my housing and force me to come crawling back. But my father had underestimated me, and Mr. Abernathy. I'd never missed a rent payment in 5 years. The landlord reviewed my file, laughed, and told me my father's name was removed effective immediately. His attempt to weaponize my stability had failed. The true climax, the point of no return, came 3 days later. A sharp, official knock at the door. A woman in a business suit stood there, holding a clipboard. "Sarah Miller? I'm from Child Protective Services. We've received an anonymous report concerning the welfare of a child at this address." The world stopped. They had weaponized the state. They had tried to use my child, my Chloe, as the ultimate pawn to punish me for my boundaries. The woman was thorough. She inspected the apartment, checked the fridge for food, examined Chloe's clean, well-stocked nursery, reviewed her extensive medical records from the NICU. I provided everything: proof of income, pediatrician's contacts, a notarized letter from Ben and Jessica affirming our stable, if unconventional, co-parenting arrangement. 20 minutes later, she closed her folder. "The case is closed, Ms. Miller. I'm sorry for the intrusion. It's clear someone has a personal vendetta." She gave me a look of genuine sympathy. "You have a beautiful, well-cared-for daughter." I thanked her, closed the door, and slid to the floor, my entire body trembling not with fear, but with a pure, incandescent rage. They had drawn a line in the sand, and they had chosen to fight dirty. They had tried to take my child. In that moment, any lingering hope for reconciliation, any shred of genetic loyalty, was annihilated. The war was over. They had used their ultimate weapon, and I was still standing. Now, it was time to build a fortress they could never breach. The silence that settled after the visit from the Child Protective Services worker was of a different quality. It wasn't the emptiness that used to frighten me, but a heavy, dense silence after a battle had ended. I sat on the floor, leaning against the door, listening to my heartbeat, steady and loud. They had crossed the final line. Not a financial one, not an emotional one, but an existential one, the line that separates simple hostility from a war of annihilation. And they had lost. That night, Ben, having learned what happened, appeared on the doorstep with a small travel bag. He didn't ask if I needed company. He simply walked in, set his bag down in the corner, and said, "I'm staying. For a while." This time, he didn't stay in the living room, but in my old spare room that we once used as a study. No hints, no pressure. Just presence. Solid as a rock. He integrated into our lives with a quiet, methodical efficiency. He fixed the leaky faucet while I fed Chloe. He got up for night feedings, brought me a glass of water when I fell asleep on the couch with the baby on my chest. He became the quiet, reliable background of our existence, and I, to my own surprise, stopped flinching at every knock at the door. My grandmother Eleanor, upon learning about the CPS call, silently cried, not from fear, but from rage. The very next morning, she came to us with 2 huge bags. I retired, she announced, setting a pot of soup on the floor. Officially. My boss already thought I was crazy for working at my age. Now I'll work here. She pointed a finger at Chloe. As a nanny. With a free schedule and unlimited hugs. And she moved in. For real. She brought her old armchair, her tea collection, and a photo of my grandfather. She took the second bedroom, and our house filled with the smells of home cooking and the sound of knitting needles. We had become a strange, patchwork tribe. Me, my daughter, my ex-husband, and my great-grandmother. It wasn't smooth or perfect. There were days when I snapped from exhaustion, and days when Ben withdrew into himself, his thoughts with his other family. There were days when Eleanor complained about back pain, but I'd see her stubbornly shaking a rattle in front of Chloe, gritting her teeth. But we held on. We weren't just coping, we were living. And in this life, there was no longer any room for the toxic adrenaline spikes caused by my former family. They tried to attack again, of course. The silence from their side lasted about a month, and then one afternoon, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw them again, Robert, Carol, and Kyle. This time, their smiles seemed even more strained, almost like grimaces. They were holding that manila envelope and a box of some old baby clothes I had once given to Amanda. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. Chloe was sleeping in a sling on my back. Sarah, we need to talk, my mother began, her voice trembling with false tenderness. We can't go on like this. We're family. My father handed me the envelope. We've reviewed the spreadsheet. We're ready to start payments. For real. Kyle sullenly handed me another small envelope. Here's another 40. I got a part-time job. I looked at them, and I was overcome not by anger, but by something like scientific curiosity. They truly didn't get it. They thought this was an auction, and that their $60 hadn't been enough, so they were offering 40 more. Why? I asked with genuine curiosity. What do you want? We want our grandchild. Carol blurted out, and for the first time, her voice held real, naked pain. And then I understood. It wasn't about me. It was about them. About their picture of a perfect family, which now had a hole in it. It was about ownership. They missed their granddaughter, whom they had never even seen. You don't want your granddaughter, I said quietly. You want to regain your control. And access to my wallet. My father's face contorted. If you go this far, Sarah, we will go all the way too. Mark my words. I laughed again. It was the laugh of liberation. You've already gone all the way, Dad. You called CPS. You have nothing left to offer me but empty threats. And I'm not interested. I turned around, opened the door, and walked into our warm, life-filled home, closing the door on their petrified faces. For the last time. They didn't call again. They didn't text. They didn't come by. A true silence, finally, settled. Not a strategic one, but a final one. Weeks passed, then months. Chloe was growing like a weed. Her cheeks filled out, her gaze became aware, she recognized me, Ben, Eleanor. She started to laugh, a real, deep, infectious laugh that filled every corner of our apartment. Ben and I installed cameras in the hallway, but they never captured anything but delivery men and neighbors. One evening, when Chloe had finally fallen asleep and Grandma was watching her TV series, I sat in the kitchen with Ben. We were drinking tea, and a comfortable silence hung between us. Jessica suggested coming over on Sunday, he said, breaking the silence. With the baby. Just to say hello. I nodded. Okay. I'll bake a pie. He looked at me, and there was something new in his eyes, something calm and settled. You good? His eternal, ritual question. This time, I could answer with more than a nod. Yes, Ben. I'm good. Truly. Jessica's visit on Sunday was awkward but sincere. She was a quiet, pleasant woman, and her son was a charming little boy. She brought a box of clothes he had outgrown, and as she was leaving, she unexpectedly hugged me. I'm glad he can be here, for both of you, she whispered in my ear. He's become calmer, better. That hug, that gesture of acceptance from a woman who, by all rights, should have hated me, became the final piece in my new reality. It fixed some broken part inside me. That night, I logged into my online banking and did what I should have done years ago. I cancelled all automatic transfers to Kyle for his tuition which he never finished. I removed my credit cards from my mother's account, which I had been paying for. I deleted the shared family calendar that had been in my phone for years, and which, I now realized, no one but me had ever opened. I didn't send any notifications. I didn't explain. I just silently turned off the valves through which my life had been draining away all those years. A year passed. A full year since the day I left the hospital with Chloe in my arms, feeling like I was carrying not only her but the weight of everything we had been through. We celebrated her first birthday. She was small but strong, a real hurricane of energy. She loved music, threw her food with Olympic precision, and loved sitting in Ben's arms, falling asleep on his chest to the steady beat of his heart. Ben still came over almost every day. Not out of duty, but because he wanted to. He became a part of our life, like reliable furniture. Jessica and her son became part of our extended circle. We sometimes went to the park together. It was simple, respectful, and kindly human. And Grandma Eleanor never left. She officially moved in, brought all her things, and declared that retirement was much more interesting. She watched Chloe while I worked and spoiled her hopelessly. She said that all the years she watched me carrying everyone else, she was saving up her strength to be my support now. As for the others, nothing. No calls, no messages. And that silence, which once hurt, was now just a fact. They disappeared not because they were hurt. They disappeared because they lost access. And without access, I was useless to them. They never asked to meet Chloe. Not once did they ask how she was, never heard her babble her first word, never saw her take her first wobbly steps, tottering like a drunk penguin before plopping down. They weren't interested. And the hardest part of my healing wasn't letting them go, but finally realizing that they were never really there to begin with. I wasn't bitter. I was just free. Sometime later, I got a message from Kyle. Just one line, "You really chose strangers over your own family?" I didn't reply. But in my mind, I said, they're not strangers. Not Ben, not Jessica, not Grandma, and not this little girl I carried through hell. You don't get to claim family when you only show up for the benefits. You don't get to cry abandonment when the only thing you ever gave was a list of your needs. I'm sitting on my couch now, in an apartment cluttered with toys. Photos of Chloe that Ben hung everywhere are on the walls. I can hear Grandma humming an old song in the kitchen while making dinner. I still flinch when I hear an unfamiliar knock at the door. That kind of fear doesn't leave overnight. But I no longer live in that fear. I live in a house filled with tiny shoes, children's laughter, perpetually cooling coffee, and real, quiet, unassuming love. This isn't a happy ending in the fairy tale sense. I didn't win the lottery or find my soulmate. But it's real. I have my child. I have safety. I have people who showed up. And I have peace. And that is more than enough. Another 6 months passed. The silence transformed from tactical to permanent, and then into something natural. I stopped checking the block numbers, stopped flinching when the mailman dropped letters into the box. The anticipation of the next blow was replaced by the understanding that there would be no more blows. They had exhausted their arsenal, and I had survived it. This knowledge was like a warm, heavy blanket wrapping around me on cold nights. Chloe was growing, developing character. At 1.5 years, she was petite but incredibly energetic and determined. Her favorite word was self, and with a stubbornness worthy of a better cause, she tried to put on her own socks, zip up her jacket, and climb onto the sofa from which she inevitably fell. Her laughter, clear and carefree, became the soundtrack of our lives. She adored animal books, would hug Ben's leg when he came home from work, and secretly begged Grandma Eleanor for cookies, gazing at her with her bottomless eyes. Ben became more than just a frequent guest, he became an integral part of our home's landscape. He still slept in the den, but his things gradually migrated to the hallway closet, and his toothbrush had taken up permanent residence in our bathroom. We weren't a couple in the romantic sense. What had grown between us was much deeper and stronger. We were allies, a team, two pilots steering the same ship through life's turbulence. He was my best friend, the most reliable one I had ever had. His son, little Jacob, became Chloe's first friend. His wife, Jessica, turned out to be a surprisingly kind and generous person. She wasn't jealous, she didn't make scenes. Instead, she drew us into her orbit. We went to the zoo together, had shared dinners, and I saw the tenderness in her eyes as she watched Ben playing with both children. She once said to me while we were washing dishes after one such evening, "He's become the man he was always meant to be. Thank you for giving him that chance." I almost cried then. Instead, I just hugged her, this amazing woman who could find happiness in a complex, non-standard situation. Grandma Eleanor blossomed in her retirement. She shed her years of fatigue like a snake shedding its old skin. She joined a crossword puzzle club, made friends, and delighted in spoiling her great-granddaughter rotten. She said these were her golden years, and she intended to spend them exactly like this, in an atmosphere of love, not obligation. We had formed our own universe, small but incredibly sturdy. It wasn't a classic family from a commercial, but something else, woven from choice, loyalty, and mutual respect. We had our own rituals: Sunday pancakes made by Ben, evening story time with Grandma, walks in the park with Jessica and the kids. In this universe, there was no place for manipulation, guilt, or toxic obligations. There was only love. Quiet, daily, practical love. One spring day, while sorting through the mail, I came across an envelope with familiar handwriting. From my mother. My hand wavered, not from fear, but from mild surprise, as if seeing an artifact from a long-forgotten civilization. I almost automatically tore it up and threw it away without opening it. Then I stopped and looked at my hands. They weren't shaking. There was no anger or longing in my chest. Just a faint curiosity about what they had concocted this time, and an instant indifference to the answer. This was the final frontier. They could no longer hurt me. I returned to the kitchen, where Chloe, sitting in her high chair, was trying to feed yogurt to Ben, and Grandma, pretending to be indignant, was wiping the floor. Sunlight flooded the room. I walked over, took the spoon from my daughter, and fed her a spoonful of yogurt myself. She burst into laughter. That evening, putting Chloe to bed, I watched her eyelashes flutter against her cheeks and thought about the strange path that had led me here. I had lost the family I thought was mine and found the one I had created myself. I thought about my dream, that vision of holding my newborn daughter surrounded by family. Life really rarely plays out the way we imagine. It turned out to be harsher, but also more just. It took away the illusions and gave me something real in return. My daughter will grow up knowing what healthy boundaries are. She will know that love is not about sacrificing until you're empty, but about mutual support. She will know that family isn't just blood, but those who hold you when you fall and rejoice in your laughter. I kissed the top of her head and left the room. In the living room, Ben and Grandma were watching an old movie. He shifted over, making space for me next to him. I settled in beside him, and without looking, he covered my wrist with his warm hand. A simple, unassuming gesture. A gesture of belonging. Outside, dusk was gathering. The house was quiet, cozy, and safe. This wasn't the end of the story. This was its present, living, breathing present. And I was finally its full owner. Completely. Without a trace.